Alright, it's here somewhere. Let's see. No. Nope. There goes my cat trying to get in the way. Aha. They told me, don't keep a dictionary because you have the internet now. But this bit doesn't work without a dictionary. And it's a big one. N-O-T. Noah. Oh, here it is. Let's see, it's here somewhere. Right here at the bottom of the screen, of the page. No. Adverb. Nay. Not so. Opposed to yes. Not at all. Not in any way wise. Hey, since I already had this out, let's go to the C section. And here we go. It's going to be one of these words here. Right here. Consent. To yield or to give assent as to a contract. Agree. To agree together. That's another word you should learn, Mr. Shapera. About 11 years ago, right at the start of my sophomore year of high school, one of my friends told me about this YouTube series he thought I would enjoy. He told me absolutely nothing about it other than saying its name, Marble Hornets. Intrigued, when I got home that night, I finished my homework. Or probably not, in all honesty I wasn't very good at doing that, and then I jumped onto the computer to see what the hell this thing was. Now at the time, the only computer I owned sat all alone in a corner of the basement, something I wish I had told my friend before I went home that night, and not the next day. When I first looked into Marble Hornets, there were only 18 entries out and the introduction. So I watched the introduction a little half interested in whatever it was saying, and then promptly made my way into entry number 1. Soon enough, Slenderman became a fascination. Every time a new entry came out, my friends and I would watch it and then spend hours talking about what happened. That same year, when my birthday rolled around, we actually watched the entire series up until that point, which was only season 1 back then. And it wasn't just Marble Hornets. We watched things like Tribe 12, Dark Harvest, and of course Everyman Hybrid, which is my personal favorite. All of this to say, I am a fan of Slenderman. And I know with certain events that might be a weird thing to say, but people still watch Scream. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, well, you can figure it out. Point being, I spent several years following Slenderman and I had a pretty good understanding of who he was and how he worked. I was basically a Slenderman hipster because I legitimately knew about him before most of the world did. So by the time the first video game came out in 2012, I'd already spent years with this character and had a pretty good understanding, and quite frankly, I was actually pretty disappointed with the game, but that's neither here nor there. In fact, a lot of my friends really enjoyed it. I was still very much excited when I saw that there was a Slenderman musical, and in part because it was written by the guy who did Dolls of New Albion, one of my absolute favorite musicals. Sure, that one had some problems and I made a whole video about it, but I still think that the music was pretty awesome, and that's really what matters in a musical. The plot wasn't the best, but oh well. So I sat down and I listened to the Slenderman musical, the entire 28-song, 116-minute musical, and I can tell you in full confidence, Paul Shapera has absolutely no idea who Slenderman is. And I'm very sorry to say, this musical is not worth your time. Let's talk about why. To fully answer this question, let's take a look at Slenderman himself so we can understand who this monster really is. Despite being made popular by Troy and Joseph in their Marble Hornet series, Slenderman was actually created on the Something Awful forums on June 10th, 2009. The original thread was a Photoshop contest in which users were tasked with creating paranormal images. A man named Eric Knudsen, who was calling himself Victor Surge at the time, saw this posting and created 2 now famous black and white images of the Slenderman. But what really helped his submission stand out over the rest were the inclusion of 2 snippets of text on his images. In the second caption, we learn the name of this new monster for the first time. And that is how Slenderman was first created. The inclusion of these 2 snippets of text transformed what were simple yet unsettling photos into stories. The Slenderman wasn't just a series of pictures anymore. He was now something that others could take and expand upon. And that's exactly what other users would do. People loved this new creature, and it exploded in popularity rather quickly. People wrote creepypastas about him, they cosplayed about him, and they just did so much. They wrote their own stories that would help create the mythos of what was Slenderman, even though it did start to fall away a little bit from what Eric Knudsen had originally envisioned. When asked about his creation about the Slenderman, Knudsen said his intention was to, quote, formulate something whose motivations can barely be comprehended and which caused unease and terror in a general population, unquote. And I want you to keep that in mind. Slenderman was someone whose motivations could barely be comprehended. Now, I don't take that to mean that Slenderman is constantly doing wild and wacky things, but instead that he is a creature driven by motivations greater than our understanding, however simple his actions might be. On a quick side note here, I actually got to meet the guys who made Marble Hornets, and it was a whole ton of fun. They signed my complete copy of the series here, and they even took a really goofy picture with me, so here's me from 6 years ago. Anyway, as mentioned, several other channels attempted, in varying degrees of success, to create their own Slenderman series. I myself even had a few attempts, but being a jobless high schooler at the time, there wasn't much I could do. And the same was true for a lot of other people, but some of them actually were successful. Again, channels like Tribe 12 were able to do well, and Everyman Hybrid, which by the way ended not too long ago, created a giant mythos and story of their own. If you want to know more about any of these series in much greater detail than I can give, I'd highly recommend checking out NIGHTMIND's Explained series on each of them. Links to those will be down below. They are incredibly long, but absolutely worth your time. These stories and videos really helped expand the mythos of the Slenderman to a degree that forum posts just weren't able to do. Having the character there in person added an extra dimension to it all. Being able to see how he could appear anywhere, at any time, and endlessly pursue you, all while driving you absolutely insane, was incredible. And then some people made a game about him about a year after. Seriously, by the time the game came out, most of the people who originally knew about Slenderman and were following Marble Hornets had already moved on. Outside of the video game, there have also been multiple movies about him as well, including the appropriately titled Slenderman, which came out just a few years ago. But for however bad that movie was, at least it was still Slenderman in it. Slenderman is this Lovecraftian monster. It didn't necessarily need to come from anywhere or do anything extraordinary. It just is this creepy thing that psychologically tortures you. Slenderman isn't complicated. He doesn't have a million abilities. He's a tall, thin man with no face who can teleport. He stalks you endlessly and drives you insane, oftentimes making you do things you might not otherwise want to do, like hurt people you know and love. He's known for having tendrils and can even appear invisible to certain people, or more so, he can selectively choose who he appears to. He's also very well known for messing with electronics, causing heavy distortion in one way or another that any film of him has captured. I want to be clear here. That distortion noise comes from the audio of the footage of him being distorted, not from him. You know what Slenderman doesn't do? He doesn't eat people. He doesn't sing a haunting tune or cry for his mom. Everything he does is psychological. Think about it. This is a creature that can appear anywhere at any time, even when you're asleep. Yet, he doesn't just straight up kill you. He stalks you, and he just keeps coming after you. And that's terrifying, because it means he wants to psychologically torture you first. He wants you to know that he can kill you before he does, and is choosing not to. And that's where the complicated motivations start to come in. So, how did Paul Shapera mess this up? Well, you saw the thumbnail, and it's not clickbait. Alright, I guess it's time. Let's talk about this musical. On another quick side note here, no one has ever actually performed this live and recorded it at least, so I don't have any real footage to show you this time like I did with Dolls of New Albion. I also can't say that I'm surprised by that though, so you're probably going to be stuck looking at this face for most of it. I actually spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to even start this section. I wasn't sure if I should give a full synopsis of the musical like I did last time, or if I should just talk about the really bad parts, or what. Ultimately, I decided that, unlike when I talked about Dolls of New Albion, I'm not going to go through the entire musical. You'll actually get the point of what's wrong with it almost immediately. But I do need to drag you through a lot of the musical just to really drive in what's wrong. So I suppose the best place to start is at the beginning. Just like Dolls of New Albion, the Slenderman musical begins with the overture. It's an entirely instrumental piece that does a really good job at setting a creepy mood. There's creepy music and weird sounds, and it's actually pretty great. It's clearly the song that says, hey, the musical is starting, but we're not like starting. But the song itself is really interesting. The main motif of the musical comes in after this creepy music, and it itself is not as creepy, but it's very much musical. But then it almost immediately switches again and becomes a completely different mood. This one's more relaxed, and there's this guy talking like he's a pastor. We actually learn who he is later on, and there's like a somewhat creepy choir going, and then before the ending, the main motif comes back in again. And it's actually a really decent representation of everything to come, as one of the biggest problems this musical has is there's no consistency throughout the different songs. Almost every song feels disjointed, and there's a ton of different genres in this musical. Then we go to the first actual song of the musical, which is called The Abbey One. It's sung by a character named Jordan, someone we don't know and won't actually meet for a pretty considerable amount of time. The first time I heard this song, I thought it was talking about the afterlife, because spoilers, there are actually ghosts in this musical, so it did kind of make sense. But it's not the afterlife. So what is this place talking about? Okay, we're gonna get to that, and it's a little weird. But first, we need to go to where the musical actually starts in the third song, which was Transcendation.
It was a massive multiplayer GPS RPG with an augmented reality paradigm, distribution model Steam, sci-fi crowdsourced open narrative backstory, and we ran about, hung out, played the game, and smoked some weed.
What? It was a massive multiplayer GPS RPG with an augmented reality paradigm distribution model Steam, sci-fi crowdsourced open narrative backstory, and we ran about, hung about, played the game, and smoked some weed. So I've played video games for a huge portion of my life, and I actually really enjoy games like RPGs, but I had never heard of a GPS RPG before, so I actually looked it up, and long story short, it doesn't exist. There's no such thing. I mean, there's a single game that's called that, but literally outside of that, there's nothing else. However, I do actually really like the line. In fact, this song is pretty good in general. It's been stuck in my head ever since I listened to it again, and hey, well, here I am making a full video because of it. I mean, it's nonsense. Half of it is absolute nonsense, and it's just trying to sound like video game talk, but it does kind of work. And that's because this song is in fact talking about a video game that just came out in the world of the musical called Transcend. The main character named Timothy, which, by the way, we don't learn his name for quite a while, and his friends are playing this game and became obsessed with it. They play it all the time, and it gets so bad one of the friends can't discern reality from game anymore, and gets put away in a mental institution. But he's not the only one to start having weird side effects. In fact, all of the people stopped playing with their phones and don't even realize it. Yeah, somehow they've been able to continue playing Transcend without needing their phones to do so. And then, right after the chorus, the song does give us a little exposition in an interesting way where we learn 3 facts about the game through a YouTuber called Infodump. Again, doesn't exist.
This is Infodump with 5 interesting things about the game Transcendation. 5. The hit game Transcendation, which has groups of players running all over towns across the world, is said to be based on a combination of Enochian magic, chaos magic, and Heka, an ancient Egyptian religion. 4. The spooky mystical bits were brought in by the game's main architect, Jordan Lane, who has been quoted as saying ritual magic is the hacking code of reality. 3. Even spookier. Both she and the game's other founder, Sean Foucault, who was also her lover, both disappeared under mysterious circumstances right around the release. Some say testing game configurations.
We learned the game was based on Enochian magic, which, by the way, is spelled wrong on the Wikipedia, and Heka, an Egyptian religion. Because, you know, Slenderman is just known for being part of Enochian magic and Egyptian religions. Apparently the spooky parts of the game were created by someone named Jordan. Oh hey look, it's that Jordan! Even though you don't know, it's the same Jordan. Why is that important? Because her and the co-creator, who were lovers by the way, both went missing around the time of the game's launch. This is actually quite an important plot point to the musical, and it's literally mentioned as a side thing here. But then we get our first actual hints of Slenderman. Another one of the characters was starting to slip a little, so she called Timothy. She explained something about cracks and how something came from it. Something thin and faceless, and that this thing marked Timothy. By the way, those are the words of the song, not mine.
She said something about the game, something about cracks and something came. Something thin and faceless, dark, and of the 5 'twas I he marked.
The song then has all the remaining players in a room together, talking about their friends and this thing. Some don't believe it's real, but Timothy says it is. He's seen them. When asked where, Timothy responds,
He's right there.
Slenderman then attacks everyone. It's all shown through chaotic music, and up until this point it's actually pretty good, it's fine. But the very next line, after the chaotic music, changes all of that.
It gutted and sliced and sucked and ate, flesh from bone and blood from brain.
It gutted and sliced and sucked and ate flesh from bone and blood from brain. Now, really quick, the rest of the song is just saying that Timothy got away and is now living on the run, but hold on, we're not just gonna let that slide. See, the thing is, Slenderman doesn't do any of that. I'm actually pretty convinced that this musical wasn't even about Slenderman to begin with. I'm pretty sure Paul Shapera made that decision later in an attempt to make it more popular. The victims of Slenderman don't get mutilated. They either go insane or just disappear. To where? We don't know. And that's one of the biggest mysteries of Slenderman. Where does he take these people, and why does he even take them to begin with? We don't know. But we do know that Slenderman doesn't eat people. And there's a slight problem with that too. Because remember just a few lines ago when the song said,
Something thin and faceless, dark.
How exactly does something faceless eat? Timothy then meets a British girl named Zoe at a bar. She comes up to him after they eye each other a little bit and ends up that she's a lesbian. Why does that matter? Well, honestly, it doesn't, but she's the one who brings it up, despite flirting with him. But they talk and hang out and even go to a Motel 6 because Timothy is honestly tired of just being on the run. It's been 3 years since everyone else died, and he's still running from a creature that can magically teleport anywhere. Great logic. Slenderman actually shows up, to no surprise, so Timothy breaks into a car. Zoe doesn't approve of this, which doesn't make sense for a reason we'll go into in just 1 second, and then as they're driving away, they get into a pretty bad accident. And this is when we finally learn our main character's name. 7 songs into this thing. That's when we finally learn about Timothy. But he's not okay after this accident, and somehow Zoe is perfectly fine. And that's because Zoe's the ghost I talked about. Not gonna lie, Possession from a Slenderman musical, which is its full name, is actually a really good song. Most of them have been, in fact. Paul Shapera knows how to write good songs. And in this one, Zoe is asking to possess Timothy. The Slenderman is getting closer and she wants to save his life. How exactly will possessing him do this? Great question. But it's what she wants to do. And this entire song is literally her asking to do so and then finally getting the permission. Also, it's actually really clever. There was a moment back at the bar where Zoe said that she was stuck there after a hitchhiking incident, which the reason it's clever is because apparently the only way she can leave is by possessing someone. And that's actually really great world building right there, and I genuinely love that. We also learn that she's trying to hunt Slenderman. Well, in the next song they say a Slenderman, implying there's more than one, but look, this is like the last really good song in this musical, and there's only one more that's just absolutely insane, and we're gonna get to that. But before that point is a song called Abby 2, where I genuinely don't know what happened. This is a transitional song, but it also shows one of the other problems of this musical, and it's something that I haven't really seen in Paul Shapera's other works, so it's a little surprising. This one is definitely meant to be visual, but musicals are auditory. They should work with just the audio. Think about something like Hamilton. If you've ever listened to it and not seen the live performance, you can still know exactly what's happening. Even though I can tell in this song things are changing as the characters are literally going to the Abbey this time, I only know that from the context of the rest of the musical and not from what this song says, even if it's not a bad song on its own. But regardless, Zoe has now possessed Timothy and they show up to this place called the Decadent Abbey. Even though it's never really explained, like, at all, apparently it was Jordan, and I have to assume Zoe's, plan to capture the Slenderman this way, which, when you think about it, rather convenient that Zoe happened to meet someone running from the Slenderman and ended up in a position where possession was a good plan. I can think of a reason or two why this plan didn't necessarily work before this. Let me put it this way. A plot isn't when things just happen to characters, but when characters make things happen, when they are active participants in the story. Seriously, Zoe said she couldn't leave the bar area. If Timothy hadn't shown up, what was the plan? If they hadn't crashed, what was the plan? The plot of this musical falls apart the second you put any thought into it. And yeah, Zoe knew Timothy would be the guy because he could see her, but again, what would happen if he hadn't shown up or just didn't go to that bar? The plot of this musical is not driven by whatever the characters do. They just happen to be going from story point to story point with no connection between them. So it's actually entirely possible that the plan to capture Slenderman was completely separate from Zoe wanting to possess Timothy at all. And to make it more confusing, like I said, the Abbey is not the afterlife. It's actually described as the last post on the shore of reality. And for some reason that's, again, never really explained, Timothy and Zoe are apparently safe from the Slenderman here. He's just been captured by Jordan. But this place is also like a different dimension, so they're not necessarily dead, but they're also not necessarily alive. They're not on the Earth we know. And I know what comes next, and I know what happens later in this musical, and that's just really confusing. Because the next song doesn't really work, if they're not actually still on Earth. So basically, to the best of my understanding, Zoe possessed Timothy, and somehow that meant that when Slenderman came, he was captured by Jordan, and Zoe and Timothy are now in the same place apparently, but not captured and are fine. Also, I do really want to point out that Zoe and Timothy are not with Slenderman and Jordan at this point. They are completely in separate locations for some reason. Are you starting to see the problem here? Even though the musical can be really good, the writing is pretty abysmal. And I know there are musicals out there where the plot is pretty non-existent, like Cats, but at least I can still tell you what the plot of Cats actually is. I can tell you what's happening, but here, I don't know. And at this point, the audience doesn't even know who Jordan is or why we should care about them. There has been nothing telling us that this singer in this song of The Decadent Abbey is Jordan and is the one who created the game. I know that because I looked up the lyrics, but the musical itself doesn't portray that. And she's not the only person we don't know in this song. There's a second singer named Samuel who, sings as well. But you don't know who these people are by just listening to them. And you don't know who they're even singing to. It's a little confusing. And I think they're singing to Slenderman. I actually don't know. And what really sucks is that's not the worst part about this musical. Nope. The next song, Song 11, simply titled Zoe and Timothy, is where everything changes. This is the song where the musical just completely stops being about Slenderman and changes to become about sex and problems that, in all honesty, Paul Shapera should have just completely avoided. This song, which is rather short by the way, is about Zoe wanting to get in bed with a girl that she sees. And so what? It's a little weird to go from almost dying in a car crash to this all of a sudden, but Zoe's been established as lesbian, so who really cares? The problem isn't that she suddenly wants to do this. The problem is, she's still in Timothy's body, and Timothy objects to this multiple times. And when he does, Zoe makes it seem like it's an inconvenience for her. Like he's the bad one for not agreeing to this. Eventually, she promises him 5 minutes and even tells him that he should better not dare finish in that time because she just never accepted no as an answer. What the hell is wrong with you, Mr. Shapera? That's not okay. At one point, Zoe even says, if you were in a girl's body, wouldn't you want to have a go? No, it doesn't work that way. Timothy is straight, which was established when he was hitting on Zoe back at the bar, and I obviously can't speak for him or for every male, but he probably wouldn't want to do that, and that's not a good argument. Zoe is just incredibly dismissive throughout this entire song about using Timothy's body, to the point that she's even disgusted at realizing he would be watching her have sex with this other woman. I mean, she's acting like she's borrowing his car, and not literally possessing everything that he is. And that's also not to mention that this other girl Zoe saw has absolutely no idea about any of this. If they were to do so, and it's implied that they do, this other girl would be under the impression she is laying with a man the whole time. She does not know that Zoe is in the male body using both it, him, and her. And just to try something out, basically. And that's really messed up. There's no other way to put it. That's just wrong. And I cannot believe that this somehow turned into an actual song. I cannot believe Paul Shapera did not see the problem with this. Maybe he did. The musical is technically unlisted on his channel, but then again, so is Dolls of New Albion. And it doesn't get better. The next song, simply titled Jordan, honestly just isn't that good. The singing at points really just sucks.
As I excrete from the beast, if you cannot bring him back to me.
But this song is Jordan singing to the Slenderman and torturing him. She literally whips him multiple times in the song. And the lyrics in the song are also a little inconsistent. She's obviously singing about bringing him back, but who's him? Well, in verse 2, she says, "It was Daddy who never came back one day." But then, later in the same verse, mind you, she says,
His smile grabbed me, had me in love with him so very madly.
So is she talking about Daddy, or is she talking about Daddy? This song is just an giant exposition dump about how Slenderman came from Transcend, you know, that game that was mentioned in one song and then promptly forgotten about, and how Slenderman took Jordan's lover named Sean. So apparently she was talking about both Dad and Daddy. And while that's happening, the characters that aren't Slenderman or even interesting are literally in an extra-dimensional house. Zoe and Timothy talk again, but this time it's about drugs, and this is like literally the second time that they've talked. They haven't done much since the sex conversation, but Zoe still cannot understand that she is in someone else's body. She could actually do harm to Timothy, and she's still acting like he's being an inconvenience and she's in the right. Even though Timothy continues to protest and make it clear to Zoe that she is only loaning his body. I genuinely wish I didn't have to talk more about these characters, but sadly they are important. However, remember how I said this musical is rather inconsistent? The next song, simply titled Samuel, is a gospel song. I mean, it's really good, but I don't know who Samuel is. At first I thought he was the aforementioned lover of Jordan, but apparently that was Sean. Samuel, though, does have some sort of relationship to Jordan, but he was only in that one song before and then shows up now. It's really not that important though, because I'm really just trying to get to the next song, which is the one that is absolutely insane. This song is called The Librarians, and you should really listen to it in its entirety before you go any further. If you've heard this musical before, you know exactly why I'm saying that, because I cannot explain this thing properly. Seriously, go and listen to it, I'll wait. This is one of the most insane songs I have ever heard. It starts out alright. Slenderman is singing a lullaby his mother sang for him because apparently that's a thing. But then there's... Yeah, apparently that's all Slenderman wanted. All he wanted to do was mate with someone, and I'm starting to think that maybe I'm the one who doesn't get Slenderman. But then, the actual library part of this song comes in, because, you know, it's called The Librarians. And, Zoe and Timothy go there for some reason. It's never really explained. And they find... I have no idea. I don't know. I genuinely, I do not know. I have absolutely no idea what the hell just happened. Imagine if this was an actual real-life performance. Imagine that you, a fan of Slenderman, heard about this musical, so you go and pay to see it, and this is what you get. A tied-up Slenderman being forced to have sex, and whatever the hell this is. Oh, and this encounter with Jordan makes Slenderman want to start having sex with other people. As he, along with Timothy/Zoe, go on and try to leave this place, Slenderman starts slapping Timothy's ass, wanting some sex. Look, the rest of this musical is not worth going into. I dragged us here to this point because I told you that the thumbnail wasn't clickbait, and it's not. This musical ends with Slenderman having sex with Timothy. No, actually no. It ends with Timothy being forced to have sex with Slenderman, and just like every other time, he refuses and actually says no. He makes it extremely clear this time that this is something he doesn't want to do. And you know what Zoe tells him? She says that he needs to just bite the bullet and do it. Just do it with this ethereal monster from another plane. And even then, he says no. But apparently that doesn't matter to anyone else because they end up taking over his body and making him do it anyway. And you hear everything, even Slenderman's moans. I mean, Slenderman dies at the end of this musical with a shot to the head, which really just cements that Paul Shapera does not know this character. But that's what happens. Slenderman decides that he would rather mate with people than eat them, which are both things that Slenderman should not be doing anyway. Absolutely nothing about the monster in this musical is Slenderman. Absolutely nothing. The whole on the run part, which actually makes the character interesting, is even between songs. We don't see anything. There's nothing psychological here. There's no stalking or anything like that. There's nothing even scary here. This creature in this musical is a mommy-wanting lover who never had sex ed, and it's an insult to the character. I mean, again, you do know that the distorted audio doesn't come from him, right? Mr. Shapera, I like you and the music that you make most of the time, but what a waste of a couple of hours this was, to be honest. I'm genuinely glad Dolls of New Albion is as good as it is because this just wasn't worth it. I don't care if you like Slenderman or Paul Shapera or any of that. This is not worth your time. There is no redeeming this or making it better. This is a thing that should not exist. There is so much wrong here about Slenderman and about other things too that I genuinely wish I could forget all of this exists. Like I said, Paul Shapera can write good songs, but he crossed the line a few times here. No means no, and I still do not understand. I am never getting that out of my head.